You that there's a movie this Sunday continuing our cinematic investigation of marriage, the movie The Secret Lives of Dentists. We'll show it 2 o'clock in the afternoon in this room. Bring palms if you'd like. So we're turning our attention back to Andre Dubus's short stories and to his investigation of the relationship between Ted Briggs and Luann Arsenault. I said at the end of the last lecture that there's something about the movie Hannah and Her Sisters that I find immoral, something about the treatment of marital infidelity there. A number of students in the response cards were harsher than I was about the characters in the movie and expressed a desire to see them suffer, or at least to see them suffer more. I have found over the years that I've had students read this Dubus short story, The Timing of Sin, that I will always get a significant number of responses that would really like to see Luann suffer, who feel that this story lets her off too lightly. So the issue of marital infidelity is one that creates, you might say, an aesthetic problem, a literary problem of how to present something that's beautiful, as Dubus told us he wants to do, but yet at the same time avoids making something beautiful that in fact is very ugly, very destructive. A reader, I'm one of those readers, who finds Luann an especially attractive character might, exactly because she's made so vividly attractive to us, we might suffer a kind of moral paralysis in the face of her attractiveness, so that somehow we diminish the severity of what she herself understands to be a sin. This brings us back to some of the themes that we already explored in Death in Venice. Issues about how beauty can become unhinged from morality. One reason that in a course that claims to integrate philosophy and literature, philosophy is usually allowed to win, is the anxiety that when literature wins, beauty triumphs over morality. Gustav von Aschenbach seems to live out some of the consequences of letting beauty triumph over, if not exactly morality, at least over one's artistic discipline. Should Luann suffer more for her infidelity than she does in The Timing of Sin? Should I, to be fair, which I've already told you I'm not interested in, condemn this story in something like the way I criticized Hannah and Her Sisters? Let me say something about why I'm not tempted to do that, though I'm open to the conversation, the kind of conversation that might show up in your own writing, for example, about why this short story is a kind of failure rather than, as I think of it, a particular success. For Luann Arsenault, as we found out in All the Time in the World, her sexuality is very tightly integrated with her religiosity, with her sense, particularly, of the sacramental character of her own life. For Luann, God does not enter her life as a disembodied, otherworldly person. God enters into her life through bodily practices, through, you might say, the way she inhabits the world as herself incarnate, as meat, as fleshly. So it's not surprising that for a woman so vividly sensual, her sexuality is a big part of her everyday life. So that in this particular short story, we're presented with Luann and her friend Marcia on a rather half-hearted exercise program, a very bodily undertaking. More than a few couples have begun their courtship through exercising together, because there's something very physical about that. Luann and Marcia recognize in each other something attractive, and not attractive just to their respective husbands. By the way, when you write your papers, never use the word respective. It's a terrible word that people misuse all the time. So Marcia and Luann, they love their husbands, but they can also see that if the world were different, and if they were different, they could find each other sensually attractive. Does this mean they're lesbians? No. It means they're normal people. It means that the way they live in the world is that they live in a body. When we read Plato's Symposium, one of the impediments for us is all of the talk about the erotic interest of males in other males. We're tempted to think of that as, oh my God, all these Greeks, they're homosexual. But then we read on and we find out that lots of them are married and they have children. And then we think, oh God, they're bisexuals. And we just hope no other species walks in the room. They may turn out to be trisexuals for all we know. But that's not the way they experienced their own sexuality at all. To us, we look at them and we think, man, they got two of something I only got one of. I guess we ought to be jealous. They get the same spark of personal excitement, that extra level of energy in conversation and interaction that you have when you're in the presence of someone who's physically attractive to you, who's erotically attractive to you. They get that not with half the people in the room, but with all of them. They look around, they see blondes, brunettes, redheads, they think, man, they're hot. And they haven't even started to talk about the women yet. To us, this seems kind of odd, because in this last 100 years, we've learned to think of something we call sexual orientation. Actually, the very term sexual orientation is much younger even than that. For the Greeks, their primary erotic responsiveness is not to male or female, it's to beautiful. Now, Plato, as many other Greeks of his time, were quite critical, as a matter of fact, of the physical expression of this erotic attraction in same-sex relationships. But what Plato's critical of is not the existence of an erotic dimension of the personal attractiveness of every human being. what he's critical of is the making of something merely physical out of that erotic attraction, which, though it doesn't show up so much in the Symposium, is something that Plato talks about in other dialogues. So, in the scene where Luann and Marcia, as Luann's talking about how sexually excitable she's been recently with Ted, and Marcia feels a twinge of jealousy about Ted. That is, not that she would like to have sex with Ted, but rather with Luann. When she feels that twinge of erotic interest in Luann, I don't think we're to understand Marcia or Luann as somehow extremely odd or as perverse. We're to understand them as embodied people for whom sexual response to others is a normal part of what they have to negotiate, a normal part of where they get their energy and of where they get their temptations. So the story is trying to work over a kind of complexity about erotic response that the simple division of sexual orientation or the simple word adultery doesn't do justice to. It's possible for the young and unmarried sometimes to think that marriage should, and indeed even that marriage will, eclipse the erotic attractiveness of everyone other than one's spouse. This story takes it as a matter of course that that's false. Luann walks through a world of erotically interesting people. She would feel it as a diminishment of her life, of her liveliness, if that aspect of the world were to disappear. The reason that she almost commits adultery with Roger, who, given Marcia's reaction, must not look like Brad Pitt, say, the reason that she almost commits adultery with him is that she finds him a very attractive man, not merely physically, but the way that she admires him, the way that she sees in him a tenderness for these broken girls to whom he's dedicated his life, the way she sees him as paternal, as fatherly toward them, turns her on, makes him erotically attractive. The line between admiration and attraction is a very blurry one. And Luann being married, being happily married, being committed to her marriage, doesn't make the line any starker. It just means that the dishonesty of a failure to respect the line is all the more emphasized. In a very revealing moment after Luann has told the story to Marcia, she says to Marcia, "If I ever talk as if I could never be tempted, as if there's no risk for me anymore. I had my bad moment, I overcame it, and I am as pure as the new driven snow now. I would never, never be in that position again of needing something like the luck that I was wearing jeans instead of a skirt to save me. I'll never need that again." Luann says, if I ever say something like that again, love me, hit me, slap me. Because part of the reason Luann let herself be in that position was a false view of her own strength. What she says to Marcia is, sex is like the weather. It's just there. It's like going to Notre Dame. The weather, you wake up, you put on your shorts, it's 75 degrees. You get out Ancient Wisdom and Modern Love, it's cold and there's sleet. And all you can say is, I'm glad I brought my raincoat. You never know when weather might happen to you. You should dress safely. Coated in latex all the time. Luann doesn't want to have safe sex. Because for her, to have safe sex is to give up what sex is. That suddenness that lets her say, my God, when she realizes that Ted Briggs might be the kind of man she wants to have sex with. To have safe sex would be something like replacing my God with my plumber. Why would anybody want to live that way? At least Luann does not want to live that way. But then she's got to admit that if she's unwilling to make sex safe for her by always having her raincoat available, she'll also need help. And for her, she finds that help sacramentally. And so she tells her friend Marcia that what she's going to do is go to confession, which Marcia finds incredibly quaint. So wait, you just about had adultery in a car under a streetlight, and you're going to go tell a priest about this? There's something rather comical about this, isn't it? Don't you think you know more about sex than a priest would, after all? But that's not the way Luann sees it. Luann sees that what she needs, or believes that what she needs, is forgiveness. Because she thinks that it's only by recognizing that she needs something from somebody else that she'll stop with the fantasy that she's in control, that her sex can be safe sex. So the story drives us to the notion that Luann confessing is not, as I think many students respond to this, a cheap or an easy way out for her. Rather, it's Luann coming back to her sense of herself, seeing that she can't do it all alone. But her recognition that she can't do it all alone can look like an excuse. To her, it's a taking of responsibility, taking, so to speak, possession of her own weakness. But from another point of view, a point of view that demands more self-sufficiency morally than Luann demands from herself, this can look, her acknowledgement of weakness, like it's giving her an excuse. For me, the sacramentalizing of her acknowledgement of that weakness, the making of it something practical in which she turns her heart and mind towards some sort of redemption, prevents me from interpreting her claim to weakness as, in fact, a cover story, as a way of giving herself permissions. But I can understand why other readers do not respond to her that way, think that she has taken a cheap way out, a way that doesn't demand enough from herself. I found, in discussing this story with lots of different readers over the last few years, that a number of readers are most offended by one particular exchange between Luann and Marcia. When Marcia says to Luann, "Don't ever tell Ted? And Luann says, oh, of course I wouldn't tell Ted. I found that a fair number of readers think that that is a moment of betrayal of Ted. That what she should do is confess not to God through a priest, through a sacrament, but rather confess to her husband. There's a certain ideal of marriage as a transparent relationship in which no small part of the responsibility of being a spouse is to let yourself be fully visible, seen utterly by your spouse. This short story disagrees with that thought, puts forward the prospect that even in a marriage, there will always be some opacity that we bear to our lovers. What sort of demand of truthfulness is appropriate at the heart of a marriage? More generally, what kind of demand for transparency, for explicitness, should be a requirement of true repentance and of forgiveness? The theological tradition about the Catholic sacrament of confession or reconciliation or penance or whatever the hell they're calling it these days, they keep trying to give it some softer name. It's confession. You did something wrong, you go and you say you did something wrong. The tradition is that it's inappropriate for the priest to demand of the person confessing a confession to the person wronged. In some cases, that might be a part of what's required for real confession. But it's not a standard part. For whom would Luann do the confessing if she brought this to Ted? Would she do it to make Ted feel better? Or would she do it in a selfish way, to make herself feel better? And now, to place the burden of forgiveness rather than the burden of penitence, to place it on him rather than on her. What kind of ideal of mutual transparency is appropriate in a marriage? When should we demand from a spouse a confession to us? When should we burden a spouse with a confession of our own faults? These are themes that will be taken up in The Secret Lives of Dentists. Hope you see the movie Sunday, and see you on Monday.